The 1970s were a turning point in film history, a decade when traditional Hollywood lost its grip and underground cinema kicked the doors wide open. This was the era of grindhouse theaters, flickering film reels, and audiences who came not for stories, but for shocks. Among the many genres that exploded during this time, one stood out for its raw intensity and unapologetic violence. Exploitation films. These weren't just movies, they were social experiments disguised as entertainment. Created on shoestring budgets and often filmed outside the studio system, these films explored taboo topics with a boldness mainstream cinema wouldn't touch. But some didn't just push boundaries, they obliterated them. From grotesque revenge fantasies to sadistic survival tales, these are the films that drenched the screen in blood, blurred the lines between art and obscenity, and left critics outraged and audiences obsessed. Some were banned, others sparked protests. All of them earned their place in cinematic infamy. This is Ventaverse, and today we're exploring 10 brutal exploitation films from the 1970s that took things too far. Films that shocked even the grindhouse crowd and whose legacies are still whispered about today. Number 10. Fight for Your Life, 1977. Some exploitation films are remembered for their gore, others for their outrageous premises. But Fight for Your Life made its mark through something far more volatile. Dialogue and tension so raw, it made even hardened grindhouse audiences squirm. Set in a quiet suburban town, the film centers around the Turner family, a God-fearing black family simply trying to live their lives in peace. But that peace is shattered when three violent fugitives, fresh off a prison escape, invade their home. What begins as a hostage situation quickly turns into a harrowing ordeal, emotionally, mentally, and socially. What separates Fight for Your Life from countless other home invasion films is the sheer discomfort of its language and confrontations. One of the intruders is a white supremacist who spews constant racial abuse, so extreme that entire regions refused to show the film. Critics didn't just pan it, many refused to even discuss it, labeling it too toxic to be art. But behind the rawness lies a deliberate message. Director Endelson wasn't glorifying hatred, he was exposing it. The film doesn't offer catharsis through flashy violence or stylized revenge. Instead, it forces audiences to sit with the fear, the powerlessness, and the rage until that tension finally snaps. Number 9. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. There are films that entertain, films that provoke, and then there's I Spit on Your Grave, a movie that split audiences down the middle and still sparks debate over 40 years later. It didn't ask for approval, it asked to be endured. And for some, that endurance was worth the pain. For others, it was a step too far. The story follows Jennifer Hills, a young woman who retreats to a secluded cabin in the woods to work on her writing. What she finds instead is a nightmare. After suffering a traumatic assault by a group of locals, Jennifer is left broken and isolated. But she doesn't stay broken. Without words, without warning, she rises. In the second half of the film, Jennifer becomes something more than a survivor. She becomes a force. One by one, she confronts her attackers, not with cinematic bravado or superhero strength, but with cold, quiet resolve. The violence isn't flashy, it's intimate, deliberate, and grounded in emotional trauma. What made the film so divisive wasn't just its subject matter, it was its refusal to sugarcoat. Director Mier Zarchi said he was inspired by a real event. A woman he knew had been assaulted and humiliated by the justice system. And yet the way he captured it led many to accuse the film of doing the very thing it condemned. Some called Jennifer a feminist icon, reclaiming power on her own terms. Others felt the film lingered too long in its depiction of trauma. Still, I Spit on Your Grave continues to be taught, analyzed, and referenced, not because it's comfortable, but because it isn't. It remains a milestone in revenge cinema, and a film that leaves every viewer with the same question: what would you do if justice didn't exist? Number 8. The Last House on the Left, 1972.
Before Freddy Krueger haunted dreams, and long before Scream flipped horror on its head, Wes Craven debuted with a film so raw, so emotionally devastating, that it became one of the most notorious horror experiences of the 1970s, and one of the earliest to spark the phrase, "it went too far." The Last House on the Left follows two teenage girls, Mari and Phyllis, who set out for a night of music and freedom. But what starts as youthful adventure quickly descends into nightmarish realism. They're captured by a gang of escaped convicts who subject them to horrific torment deep in the woods. It's not stylized, and there are no comforting horror tropes to soften the blow. Craven filmed these scenes like a documentary, handheld, matter-of-fact, and eerily quiet. That quiet makes the violence feel all the more real. But then the story shifts, violently and morally. The same criminals, unaware of their victims' identities, end up seeking refuge in one of the girls' homes. Her parents welcome them in until they uncover the truth. What follows is a startling reversal of roles, as grief turns into vengeance and the seemingly mild-mannered couple turn the home into a battleground. Craven wasn't just trying to shock, he was interrogating violence itself. He wanted to explore what people are capable of when pushed beyond reason. The result was a film that didn't just depict violence, it asked audiences to participate in it emotionally, to sit with their discomfort, and to reckon with the blurry line between justice and cruelty.
Number 7. Thriller, A Cruel Picture, 1973. Also known as They Call Her One Eye. From the icy forests of Sweden came one of the most haunting revenge stories ever put to screen. A film that influenced some of the biggest names in cinema, yet remains buried in controversy and censorship to this day. Thriller, A Cruel Picture tells the story of Frigga, a young woman left voiceless after a childhood assault. As a teenager, she is abducted and forced into a world of exploitation, where she's stripped of her agency and controlled by those who see her as nothing more than a commodity. But Frigga isn't broken, she's biding her time. What separates Thriller from other revenge films of the era is its patient, methodical build-up. Frigga uses her free hours to train, not in secret, but with intention. She takes shooting lessons, learns to drive, studies hand-to-hand combat, all while waiting for the day she can take back control. When that day comes, it's not just satisfying, it's cinematic art. The revenge scenes are stylized with balletic slow motion, stark color contrasts, and grim silence. The effect is hypnotic. It's brutal, yes, but it's also poetic. For fans of grindhouse cinema, Thriller is more than just an exploitation film. It's a cold, calculated act of reclamation and a reminder that sometimes the quietest voices become the loudest when it's time to fight back. Number 6. Cannibal Holocaust, 1979. There are brutal movies, and then there's Cannibal Holocaust, a film so realistic, so grotesque, and so ethically controversial that its director was arrested for murder. No, that's not exaggeration. When the film debuted in Italy, authorities believed they had just witnessed a real snuff film. Deodato had to prove in court that his actors were alive. The film masquerades as a documentary. It follows a group of American filmmakers who venture into the Amazon to document indigenous tribes. But what they really do is exploit, manipulate, and torment the natives for shock footage. When the documentary team disappears, another crew is sent to find them. What they return with is the lost footage, which reveals the unimaginable horror. What makes Cannibal Holocaust so infamous isn't just its violence, though the scenes of impalement, dismemberment, and sexual assault are shocking. Real animal killings on screen. A turtle, a monkey, a pig, all slaughtered for the camera without mercy. Even many die-hard horror fans draw the line here. The backlash was swift and global, banned in over 50 countries, censored in dozens more, and never released uncut in many regions. Cannibal Holocaust became the poster child for banned cinema. If there's one film on this list that defines the phrase, "went too far," this is it.
Number 5. Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodom, 1975.
Few films have ever provoked such intense reactions as Salo. Often described as one of the most disturbing movies ever made, it's a film that still divides audiences nearly 50 years later. Some call it art, others call it a film nightmare. Loosely adapted from the writings of the Marquis de Sade and set during the final days of Mussolini's fascist regime, the film follows a group of ruling elites who take a group of young people captive inside a secluded villa. What happens there is a carefully structured series of psychological and physical humiliations intended by director Pier Paolo Pasolini to reflect the corruption and cruelty of authoritarian power. Pasolini, known for his political filmmaking and unflinching honesty, used the film as a bold critique of fascism, portraying a world where human dignity is eroded by unchecked control. But the film's graphic portrayal of suffering, particularly involving youth, sparked outrage across the globe. Salo was banned in numerous countries upon release and remains restricted in several to this day. Even decades later, many film critics and scholars argue about whether it should be seen as a brutal masterpiece or a descent into obscenity. Pasolini himself was tragically murdered shortly after the film was completed, adding an eerie and tragic footnote to its already dark legacy. Salo is not entertainment, it is an endurance test, and whether viewed as allegory or provocation, it's one of the clearest examples of a 1970s film that didn't just push boundaries, it dismantled them. Number 4. The Gestapo's Last Orgy, 1977. The 1970s were no stranger to controversy, but some subgenres went far beyond the accepted limits of taste, and Nazi exploitation was one of them. The Gestapo's Last Orgy, released in 1977, remains one of the most infamous entries in this disturbing cinematic trend. Set in a fictional Nazi-occupied prison camp, the film explores a relationship between a prisoner and a high-ranking officer. But what unfolds is far from a traditional narrative. The film is steeped in unsettling imagery, morally bankrupt characters, and a deliberate attempt to shock viewers through its extreme portrayal of power, cruelty, and submission. What truly made the film notorious was its unapologetic use of controversial historical context as a backdrop for depravity. Critics weren't just offended, they were deeply disturbed by how the film blurred the lines between exploitation and genuine tragedy. It was banned outright in several countries upon release and became a target during the UK's video nasties censorship era. Even within exploitation cinema circles, this film was considered too extreme for mainstream audiences. Today, it serves as a stark reminder of how far filmmakers were willing to go in the pursuit of provocation. Whether viewed as a cautionary tale or a piece of forgotten cinema history, The Gestapo's Last Orgy is a film that crossed the line, one many argue should never have been approached in the first place.
Number 3. The Toolbox Murders, 1978. By the late 70s, slasher films had begun carving out their own twisted corner of cinema, but few arrived with as much controversy, confusion, and cult fascination as The Toolbox Murder. On the surface, it appeared to be just another grindhouse gore fest, but beneath its brutal title and marketing, the film delivered something stranger and far more unsettling. Set in a Los Angeles apartment complex, the film opens with a series of disturbing murders. A masked intruder carries a literal toolbox, using each tool in increasingly gruesome fashion. The kills are brutal, yes, but what caught critics and audiences off guard was the emotional tone of the film. It wasn't played for cheap thrills or stylized horror. It felt deliberate, personal, and soaked in psychological tension. But then, the film shifts. What starts as a violent slasher turns into a slow burn mystery, focusing on a teenage girl who disappears during the killing spree. The man behind the toolbox isn't a faceless monster. He's someone twisted by trauma, trying to cleanse the world in the most warped way imaginable. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Some dismissed it outright. Others praised its unpredictability and psychological depth. In the UK, it was labeled a video nasty, not because of its gore alone, but because it blurred the line between horror and grief-driven madness. Over time, the Toolbox Murders developed a cult following, not just for its kill scenes, but for its strange pacing, its emotional undercurrent, and its haunting portrayal of a killer who isn't fueled by rage, but delusion. Today, it remains one of the most unusual exploitation horror films of its era, a slasher that starts with a scream but ends in something far more quiet and unnerving. Number 2. Men Behind the Sun, 1978 to 1988. While most horror films of the 70s aimed to scare, Men Behind the Sun aimed to shock with truth, and it did so in ways that still provoke heated debate today. A dramatization of real-life war crimes committed by Japan's infamous Unit 731 during World War II, the film pulled no punches, and its portrayal of human experimentation, military secrecy, and historical horror. Set in a covert research facility in Japanese-occupied China, the story follows a group of young cadets who gradually uncover the unspeakable actions being carried out in the name of science and national pride. The film isn't built around jump scares or fictional monsters. Instead, the monsters are real, dressed in uniforms, operating under government orders, and committed to silence. What makes Men Behind the Sun so controversial isn't just its content, it's the tone. Director Mo Turnfei presents the events with documentary-like detachment, refusing to flinch or sensationalize, and that approach made it all the more disturbing. Some scenes, even when censored or softened, have continued to haunt viewers because they depict the calculated cruelty of war, not fantasy. The film was heavily edited in many countries, often for its graphic special effects and portrayal of minors in dangerous situations. But its purpose was never entertainment. It was confrontation. A call to remember history, not through sanitized textbooks, but through an immersive, emotional retelling that leaves no room for denial. Number 1. Snuff. Produced in 1976. There are films that are brutal. There are films that are controversial. And then there's Snuff. A movie that wasn't just infamous for what it showed, but for what it claimed to be. Originally shot in Argentina in 1971 under the title Slaughter, the film was a low-budget tale about a Manson-like cult and their descent into ritualistic murder. For years, it sat in obscurity, unreleased and unremarkable. But then, in 1976, a pair of American producers bought the film, added a new, crudely shot ending, and rebranded it under a title that would ignite moral panic across the country. Snuff. That final scene, clearly tacked on and edited to look amateurish, shows what appears to be a real murder, filmed in one take, with the camera kept rolling as the woman screams and the crew keeps filming. It's clumsy, clearly staged, and intentionally made to feel real, but at the time, audiences weren't so sure. Rumors spread like wildfire. Was this the first real snuff film ever released to theaters? Were viewers watching an actual murder? The media jumped in. Religious groups protested. The FBI even launched an investigation. And suddenly, this obscure Argentinian thriller became one of the most talked about films in America. Not for its story, but for the fear that it had crossed the line cinema was never meant to cross. Of course, it was fake. The actors were alive. The ending was staged. But by then, it didn't matter. The myth had taken hold,
and Snuff had done something no other film had managed. It convinced people that the unthinkable had been filmed and sold as entertainment. This is Vintiverse, where the past isn't just remembered, it's relived. If you want more deep dives into forgotten cult classics, banned cinema, and the wildest stories film history tried to erase, make sure you subscribe, give us a like, and drop a comment telling us which brutal movie shocked you the most. Until next time.